The sands of betrayal. The wind howled through the dunes of the Gallus expanse, carrying with it the whispers of forgotten souls. Endless golden waves of sand stretched to the horizon, shimmering like molten glass beneath Earth's unforgiving sun. At the center of this desolation lay Princess Nyxara, motionless, alone, and broken. Her purple skin, once flawless and radiant, now blistered under the brutal heat. Glowing markings that traced her regal bloodline pulsed faintly, as if struggling to stay alive. Nyxara's golden eyes, half closed, stared blankly into the endless void of sky, her mind clinging to the last memory of her father's words. A traitor does not deserve a warrior's death. Let her perish with the insects she chose to save. They had thrown her from the ship like discarded waste. The moment the desert winds swallowed her screams, she knew her fate was sealed. Death here would be slow, cruel, and silent. Nyxara tried to move, but the sand had become a cage, pulling her deeper with every failed effort. Her limbs felt like stone, heavy, unyielding. She was not made for this world. The Xerixian people were rulers of cold stars and dark skies, thriving in shadowed realms of ice and bioluminescent beauty. Here, under Earth's merciless sun, she was as fragile as glass. Yet regret gnawed at her, not for her actions, but for the consequences she faced. 2 days prior, Nyxara had stood on the bridge of the Warforge, one of the Xerixian Empire's most formidable ships. She watched Earth through the observation glass, a fragile blue orb suspended in the black void. Her father had called it ripe for conquest, weak and primitive. But what Nyxara saw was life, vibrant, chaotic, and unyielding. When she learned of the Eclipse Cannon, the Empire's doomsday weapon designed to eradicate billions, something inside her broke. The laughter of human children she'd seen in stolen surveillance footage haunted her. It was a sound she had forgotten long ago, a sound her own empire had silenced in countless star systems. So she did the unthinkable. Using her royal access codes, she transmitted the cannon schematics to the Earth Defense Coalition. Her hands shook as she pressed send, knowing she had condemned herself. But even then, she had felt pride. They deserved to fight for their survival. Now she lay dying in the aftermath of her decision. The Empire's justice had been swift, its punishment absolute. The silence of the desert pressed against her ears as if mocking her weakness. Suddenly, the earth beneath her vibrated. At first, she thought it was a hallucination, the kind that came with heat stroke and thirst. But no, something was approaching. Faint at first, the sound grew louder, the rumble of engines. Through the haze of heat and exhaustion, Nyxara forced her eyes open. Emerging from behind a dune, 3 armored vehicles came into view, their shapes blending with the shimmering sands. Human technology. Earth's defenders. Fear shot through her like ice. Humans were vicious, her people had always said. Survivors of their own wars, masters of brutality. Would they finish what her father started? Nyxara tried to move, but her body refused. The vehicles roared closer, then screeched to a halt just feet away. The sound of boots crunching sand reached her ears. She caught glimpses of humans, dark silhouettes framed against the blazing sun. Over here, a voice shouted. What in the world? Captain, we've got something here. Another voice, rough but clear, responded. A Xerixian. Alive. Nyxara's vision blurred, and she let out a weak breath. This was the end, she thought. If her own people had cast her aside, how could she expect mercy from their enemies? Boots stopped beside her, and a shadow fell over her blistered skin. Suddenly, the cruel heat was replaced by something miraculous. A cooling shade blanket draped gently over her body. She's breathing. Get her into the med unit now. But, sir, she's one of them. I don't care if she's the Emperor's heir herself. We don't leave people to die in the sand. Move. Strong hands lifted her from the ground, cradling her broken form with unexpected gentleness. Nyxara tried to speak, to ask why they were helping her, but darkness was already closing in. As her vision faded, one thought remained, anchoring her in the black. Humans. They're different. The enemy in our care. Nixura's world returned in fragments. Voices echoed in the darkness, their tone unfamiliar, calm, firm, and strangely kind. Her skin tingled with an icy sensation, a stark contrast to the blazing heat that had nearly consumed her. With effort, her golden eyes fluttered open, revealing a dim room bathed in pale blue light. The walls were smooth, metallic, yet warm, human craftsmanship, though primitive compared to Xerixian structures. She tried to sit up, but something restrained her wrists. Panic flared through her like a wildfire. Easy, easy. The voice came from a figure standing at the foot of her bed, a human male. He was tall, with a square jaw and dark eyes that reflected both caution and curiosity. His uniform was simple but dignified, marked with the insignia of Earth's Defense Coalition. Nixura's breathing slowed as the man raised his hands, palms up, in a universal sign of peace. "You're safe here. I'm Captain Elias Grant, Earth Coalition Forces." Safe. The word felt hollow in her ears. No place could be safe for a traitor. Her father's warriors would descend upon this planet soon, and they would show no mercy, not to humans, and certainly not to her. She tugged weakly at the restraints, her bioluminescent markings glowing faintly under stress. "We're not holding you prisoner," Grant added, noticing her struggle. "The restraints are just to keep you still while we stabilize your body temperature. Your physiology wasn't designed for Earth's heat, was it?" Nixura hesitated, blinking in confusion. These humans were supposed to be savage, their compassion limited to their own kind. Yet here she was, alive, recovering, and free of harm. She looked down and realized her ornate armor had been replaced by a thin cooling suit designed to mimic the cold environments of her home world. She felt comfortable. "Why did you save me?" Her voice was hoarse, the question escaping before she could stop herself. Grant studied her for a moment before answering. "Because that's what we do. You were dying, and we're not in the habit of leaving people to rot in the desert, even if they're our enemies." Nixura's eyes narrowed. Enemies. That word stung more than she'd expected. "You don't know what I've done," she murmured. "We know enough," Grant replied evenly. He crossed his arms, his gaze steady. "You warned us about the Eclipse cannon. Without your transmission, millions of our people would have died. Whatever your reasons, that act saved Earth." Nixura looked away, shame blooming in her chest. Her father's words echoed again. "You betrayed your bloodline." She had once worn her royal markings with pride, believing them a symbol of strength and honor. Now, they felt like scars. "Your people won't stop," she said, her voice trembling. "The cannon was just the beginning. My father will bring his full wrath upon this planet. He will burn your cities to ash." Grant's expression hardened. For a moment, she saw the glint of steel that all humans seem to carry in their spirits. "Then we'll fight," he said simply. Nixura turned back to him in disbelief. "You don't understand. You can't win. The Xerixian Empire spans dozens of star systems. Our weapons could shatter your moon in a heartbeat." Grant's lips twitched into the faintest hint of a smile. "You're right. Compared to your empire, we're small. But we're stubborn, Princess. We don't back down, even when the odds are against us." Stubborn, that word struck a chord deep within her. Humans were unlike any other species the Empire had conquered. They were chaotic, flawed, and primitive. Yet something about them refused to be extinguished. Nixura had seen it in their laughter, in their defiance, and now in the unwavering resolve of this man. Suddenly, the door slid open with a hiss. A woman entered, her crisp uniform and sharp gaze marking her as someone of authority. Nixura tensed as the woman approached, her boots clicking against the floor. "Captain Grant, we need to talk." "Colonel Reyes," Grant acknowledged with a nod. Reyes glanced at Nixura, her expression cold and analytical, as if studying a dangerous predator behind glass. "She's awake." "Good. I assume you've already questioned her." "She's not a prisoner, Colonel," Grant said firmly. Rise ignored him. She stepped closer to Nixara, her eyes narrowing. "The intel you sent us saved this planet. But we need more. We need to know what your empire is planning next." Nixara's markings dimmed, her heart pounding. Giving them the Eclipse cannon schematics had already damned her to her father's wrath. If she revealed more, she would be a traitor not just to her father, but to her entire species. "I can't," she whispered. Rise leaned closer, her voice low and unyielding. "If you don't help us, millions of innocent lives will die. Children, families, people who don't deserve this war. Is that what you want?" The words cut deep. Nixara clenched her fists, her glowing markings flaring brighter for a moment. Images of Earth's children, laughing, playing, full of life, flashed through her mind. The same children her father would see reduced to ashes. "Enough," Grant interjected, stepping between them. "Colonel, give her time. She's not the enemy here." Rise glared at him, but relented, turning on her heel and marching out of the room. The door hissed shut behind her, leaving silence in her wake. Grant turned back to Nixara, his tone softer now. "You don't have to decide right now. But know this, Earth is not alone in this fight. If your people want a war, we'll give them one. And if you stand with us, you'll have a place here." Nixara stared at him, her thoughts a whirlwind of doubt and fear. She had chosen to defy her father once before, and it had nearly killed her. Could she betray her empire again? For the first time in her life, Nixara felt torn between two worlds, one she had been born into, and one she had chosen to protect. "You humans are impossible," she muttered. Grant chuckled softly. "You have no idea." The price of defiance. The hum of the Earth Coalition medical bay was soft, rhythmic, almost soothing, yet it did little to calm Nixara's turbulent mind. She sat upright now, her wrists unbound, the cooling suit humming faintly against her skin. The human-designed garment clung awkwardly to her form, a reminder of how far she was from home, from her people, and from her father's forgiveness. Nixara's glowing markings pulsed faintly, a visual echo of her inner turmoil. She had expected hatred here, vengeance even. But these humans, confounding, persistent creatures, had offered her kindness. Captain Grant's words lingered like a phantom in her mind. "If you stand with us, you'll have a place here." But what did it mean to have a place among those she had been raised to see as lesser beings? The door slid open with a mechanical hiss, breaking her reverie. Grant entered, his usual calm demeanor softened with something Nixara couldn't quite name. Patience, perhaps, or hope. He carried a tray of food, a mix of colorful items she vaguely recognized from her studies of Earth. "I don't know if you'll like any of this," he said, setting the tray down on a small table beside her. "But it's better than nothing." Nixara eyed the tray warily. There was bread, fruit, and a curious cup of steaming liquid. Its scent, rich and bitter, was surprisingly pleasant. She gestured toward it with one elegant hand. "What is that?" Grant grinned faintly. "Coffee, a human necessity. Bitter, but it wakes you up." Nixara raised a skeptical brow, but curiosity got the better of her. Lifting the cup carefully, she took a tentative sip. The flavor hit her tongue like a challenge, sharp, intense, and layered in ways she hadn't expected. She lowered the cup, expression unreadable. "You humans are strange," she murmured. "We get that a lot," Grant replied, taking the seat across from her. A silence settled between them, the weight of unspoken truths hanging in the air. Grant leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady. "You look better," he said eventually. "The medical team worked miracles, stabilizing you. For someone who wasn't supposed to survive Earth's desert, you're doing all right." Nixara's markings dimmed slightly, her pride prickling. "I am Tyrixian. We endure." You endured all right, Grant agreed, and you saved millions of us in the process. The praise hit her like a blow she wasn't prepared for. Nixera looked away, the memory of her treason still raw. I didn't do it for you, she said softly, though the words lacked conviction. Maybe not, Grant replied evenly. But you did it. That's what matters. Before Nixera could respond, a sudden vibration rattled the walls of the room. An alarm blared, sharp, urgent, and jarring to her sensitive ears. Grant was on his feet in an instant, his demeanor shifting from calm to focused in the blink of an eye. Stay here, he ordered. What's happening? Nixera demanded, rising to her feet. A breach, Grant said as the door hissed open. Outside, the corridor erupted in frantic movement, humans running to their stations, weapons drawn. Grant turned back to her, his voice firm. Stay here, Princess. You're not safe outside. But Nixera had no intention of being left behind. For a Cyrixian princess, the battlefield was no stranger. She had trained for war since childhood, though never against her own people. And that's exactly what this was. She closed her eyes, focusing on the vibrations through the floor. Cyrixian warships had arrived. Her father had come for her. The arrival of the Empire. From the observation deck, Captain Grant watched in grim silence as the Earth Coalition base fell under siege. Through the reinforced glass, he could see the alien ships descending, sleek, black vessels that blotted out the sky like a storm. Their engines roared, sending dust and debris flying across the desert. Multiple ships incoming. Cyrixian landing craft deploying ground forces. A soldier called out, his voice strained through the communications line. Grant clenched his fists. They had prepared for retaliation ever since receiving Nixera's warning, but nothing could have readied them for this, an armada sent to raise everything in its path. Evacuate non-combat personnel to the lower levels, he ordered. Defense teams, hold the perimeter. They want a war. We'll give them one. He turned as a familiar voice interrupted. Captain. Nixera stood in the doorway, her tall frame emanating calm resolve despite the chaos outside. Her golden eyes were fixed on him, glowing faintly beneath the flickering emergency lights. I told you they would come, she said, her voice steady. Grant exhaled sharply. And I told you we wouldn't back down. Nixera stepped closer, her markings pulsing with a determined light he hadn't seen before. Your people will be slaughtered, she said. You're not ready for this. Then help us, Grant shot back. The words struck her like a blow. Help them. Fight her own people. The thought felt impossible. Treason beyond measure. Yet, as the base shuddered again from a direct hit, Nixera saw something in the humans she had never seen in her father's armies. Unity. These people fought not for conquest, but for survival, for each other. For the first time in her life, Nixera realized she had a choice. She could stand aside and watch humanity burn, or she could stand with them and fight. Her father had cast her out, abandoned her like a tool he no longer needed. The humans had saved her. Nixera's markings flared brighter as she turned to Grant, resolve hardening her features. I will help you, she said. But if we are to win, you must trust me. Grant's lips curled into a faint smile. Deal. As the alarms screamed and the desert outside turned into a battlefield, Princess Nixera took a step toward her destiny, not as a Cyrixian traitor, but as a warrior of two worlds. Fire and shadows. The desert sky was aflame. From horizon to horizon, Cyrixian warships loomed like blackened specters, their sleek frames blotting out the sun and casting the Earth Coalition base into an unnatural twilight. Their engines growled, vibrating through the very bones of the underground facility. Beneath the ground, the humans scrambled, shouting orders, readying weapons, and bracing for the storm. Nixera stood at the center of the chaos, her glowing markings alive with pulsing light, bright, defiant, and burning with a purpose she had never felt before. She watched the humans rally, their ragtag soldiers determined to hold the line. Against her father's empire, it was a hopeless fight. But humans were creatures of the impossible. Incoming strike. Brace for impact. The warning crackled over the intercom seconds before the earth shook violently. Dust and debris rained down as an explosion rocked the outer perimeter. The base's lights flickered, and Nixara swayed on her feet. The sound was deafening. A metallic screech, followed by the dull rumble of collapsing structures. "We need to hold Sector 7. Captain Grant's voice cut through the chaos, barking orders to his team as he stormed past. He stopped when he saw Nixara, his expression unreadable. "You should be in the secure levels." Nixara turned to him, her golden eyes blazing. "Your secure levels will not matter if the shields collapse." Grant paused, studying her with that same mixture of trust and wariness he always carried. She took a step closer, her voice steady. "I know how my people fight. I know their weaknesses." Grant's gaze narrowed. "You're saying you can stop them. I can help you hold them off. But you must listen to me." Another explosion rocked the walls, and Grant didn't hesitate. He grabbed a comm device and spoke firmly. "All teams, regroup at the western barricade. Nixara has a plan. The battle begins." Minutes later, Nixara stood beside Grant and a group of coalition soldiers at the base's western edge. The defensive barricade stretched across the perimeter, lined with makeshift weapon platforms and hastily constructed turrets. The air smelled of metal, smoke, and sweat. Through the haze, Nixara spotted the advancing Xerixian forces, shadowed figures in black armor moving in perfect formation. Energy weapons hummed in their hands, their sharp movements as fluid as a well-practiced dance. They were the Empire's finest soldiers, unrelenting, unmerciful. A pang of sorrow twisted in Nixara's chest. These were her people, warriors who had once bowed to her authority. Now, they would see her as nothing more than a traitor. "They're deploying plasma chargers," Nixara said, her voice urgent as she pointed toward the advancing Xerixians. "If they breach the barricade, this base will fall." "What's the counter?" Grant asked, crouching beside her as he scanned the battlefield. "They rely on energy shields to absorb damage," she explained quickly. "But those shields overload under sustained fire. Concentrate your turrets on the front ranks. Force them to use their shields until they collapse." Grant nodded and relayed the instructions. The human soldiers adjusted their positions, their weapons humming to life. Nixara felt their nervous glances, wariness at taking orders from the daughter of their enemy. But there was no time for doubt. "Here they come," someone shouted. The Xerixian forces charged, a wall of black armor advancing with terrifying precision. Plasma bolts erupted from their weapons, streaking across the desert like green lightning. The coalition soldiers returned fire, their rifles blazing. The battle had begun. The warrior's choice. Nixara moved instinctively, her years of training taking over as she darted along the barricade, shouting orders and identifying weak points in the enemy formation. She grabbed a fallen soldier's rifle, clunky, primitive by Xerixian standards, but effective. Raising the weapon, she fired into the charging ranks, her shot striking hard against enemy shields. Humans fought differently than her people. Where Xerixians relied on coordinated tactics and overwhelming firepower, the humans adapted on the fly. They moved with a desperate, chaotic energy that was impossible to predict. For every human that fell, another rose to take their place. "Turrets. Focus fire on the center," Nixara shouted. The coalition turrets whirred to life, unleashing a relentless barrage that pounded into the Xerixian front line. Just as Nixara predicted, the shields began to flicker, overloaded by the sustained assault. "Now," Grant roared. The soldiers unleashed everything they had: rifle fire, rockets, explosives. The Xerixian formation broke, scattering as their shields collapsed in brilliant bursts of energy. Nixara's chest swelled with something unexpected: hope. For a brief moment, it seemed they might hold the line. But the Empire was not so easily defeated. From above, A deep rumble split the sky, and Nyxera looked up to see a new vessel descending, sleek and ominous. Its silhouette sent a chill through her veins. The Harbinger, her father's personal warship. "No," she whispered. "The Emperor's fury." The Harbinger's shadow stretched across the battlefield, blotting out the light. A voice crackled through the Exarixian comm systems, amplified for all to hear. "Daughter." The word froze Nyxera in place. It was her father's voice, cold, authoritative, and laced with disappointment. "You disgrace our bloodline." Nyxera's markings dimmed as the weight of her father's condemnation crushed her. Around her, the human soldiers stared, their weapons still aimed at the advancing forces. Captain Grant stepped beside her, his voice low but steady. "Don't listen to him. He's come for me," Nyxera murmured, her voice hollow. Grant's gaze hardened. "Then let him come." Nyxera looked at him, startled by his defiance. Her father was a force of nature, an emperor who had brought entire civilizations to their knees. Yet here stood this human, unshaken and resolute. "You're one of us now," Grant said firmly. "We don't leave our own behind." Nyxera's markings flared brighter, their glow steadier than it had been in days. Her father's voice still echoed through the sky, but she no longer heard it. Her gaze turned back to the battlefield, where the Empire's forces rallied for another assault. "Then we fight," she said. Grant's lips curled into a determined grin. "That's what I like to hear." As the Harbinger loomed overhead, Nyxera lifted her rifle and took her place among the human defenders. For the first time, she was no longer a princess of the Empire. She was a warrior of Earth. The Harbinger's shadow. The ground trembled as the Harbinger descended, its colossal form blotting out the remnants of the desert sun. Dust whipped across the Earth Coalition base, swirling like ghostly tendrils around the battered humans and their alien ally. Nyxera stood frozen, her golden eyes locked onto the silhouette of her father's warship, the symbol of the Tyrixian Empire's unstoppable might. "Princess Nyxera." The voice echoed through the desert like the toll of a funeral bell. It came not through Earth comms, but from the ship itself, a thunderous projection carrying the cold authority of the Emperor. Her father's voice, powerful and unmistakable, gripped her heart in an iron fist. "I have come to deliver judgment." The human soldiers fell silent, their weapons trembling in their hands as they looked toward Nyxera. She felt their eyes, uncertain, questioning, but not accusing. They were waiting for her to move, to speak, to choose. "You are no daughter of mine," the Emperor's voice continued, each word a dagger. "Surrender now, or watch these humans suffer for your betrayal." Captain Grant stood beside her, his posture unshaken, even in the face of the Emperor's wrath. His voice broke the silence, low and steady. "You don't owe him anything, Nyxera." Nyxera's markings flared erratically as she clutched her fists at her sides. The weight of her father's presence, his power, his expectations, pressed against her, a crushing force she had carried all her life. But the humans, they were watching her not with fear, but with trust. "We don't have time for this," Grant said firmly, motioning to his soldiers. "His forces are regrouping. If we're going to hold them off, we need you." Nyxera tore her gaze away from the ship and looked at the battered coalition forces. Their uniforms were torn, their faces streaked with dirt and sweat, yet their eyes shone with determination. These were not conquerors, they were survivors, fighters who refused to give up, even when faced with annihilation. And she realized then, this was her fight. "Prepare your soldiers," she said, her voice cold and resolute. "I will deal with him." Grant's brows furrowed. "Nyxera, you can't take him on alone." She turned to face him, her golden eyes blazing like suns. "I won't let him destroy you. Not this time." Grant stared at her for a moment before nodding. "All right, but if you're going up there, you're not going alone." Into the lion's den. Minutes later, Nyxera stood inside the hangar bay, watching as Earth's last functioning dropship hummed to life. Grant and a small strike team were suiting up, their weapons charged and ready. The plan was reckless, bordering on suicidal. They would infiltrate the Harbinger and disable its command center, buying time for Earth's remaining forces to regroup. "Your people won't hesitate to kill you," Grant said, strapping him on his armor. "I know," Nixera replied. "And if we get caught?" "We won't," she said simply. It was a lie, but Grant didn't call her out on it. Instead, he offered a small, reassuring grin. "Good enough for me." Nixera stepped onto the dropship's loading ramp, her pulse pounding in her ears. She hadn't been back on a Xerixian vessel since her betrayal, and she knew what awaited her there. Enemies who had once called her princess, who now saw her as the Empire's greatest shame. The dropship's engines roared, and the floor beneath her feet trembled. As the hangar doors opened, the full scale of the battlefield stretched before them. The Empire's ground forces were pressing hard against the base, plasma fire lighting up the horizon like a storm. Above it all, the Harbinger loomed, her father's fortress in the skies. "Everyone hold on," the pilot shouted. The dropship shot forward, weaving through enemy fire with sharp, desperate movements. Nixera gripped the rails tightly, her heart hammering against her ribs. She felt the ship lurch as a plasma bolt glanced off the hull, the alarms screaming in protest. "We're almost there." Through the viewport, the underside of the Harbinger grew larger, its landing bay sliding open like the maw of a beast. Nixera forced herself to steady her breathing. Her father's shadow was a place she had feared all her life, but no longer. The dropship punched through the defenses and skidded into the landing bay, sparks flying as it ground to a halt. "Move. Go, go," Grant shouted. The strike team poured out, weapons raised and ready. Nixera followed, her glowing markings illuminating the dark corridors of the ship. The sound of boots echoed in the silence, but they would not remain unnoticed for long. "They know we're here," Nixera said, her senses sharp. "Then let's give them something to worry about," Grant replied. The daughter confronts the tyrant. The team fought their way through the ship's defenses, Nixera leading them with unerring precision. She knew every hallway, every security blind spot. Secrets her father had once trusted her to keep. Plasma fire rained around them, the sounds of battle deafening, but they pushed forward relentlessly. At last, they'd reached the command chamber. The massive doors slid open, revealing a vast, circular room dominated by a single throne. The Emperor stood at its center, his form towering and regal, cloaked in shimmering black armor that pulsed with energy. "So you've returned," he said, his voice a low growl. The strike team fanned out, weapons trained, but Nixera stepped forward alone, the Emperor's golden eyes fixed on her, cold and piercing. "You shame me further by bringing these vermin onto my ship," he said. "I brought them to end this," Nixera replied, her voice steady. Her father laughed, a deep, hollow sound that sent chills through the room. "End this. You are but a child playing at rebellion. Did you think these humans could save you?" "They already have," Nixera shot back. "They saved me from you." The Emperor's expression darkened, his power radiating through the chamber like a storm. "You are no daughter of mine," he spat. "No," Nixera said, lifting the human rifle in her hands. "I'm something more." At her signal, Grant and the strike team opened fire, their weapons blazing. The Emperor roared as the battle erupted, plasma bolts and energy shields clashing in a storm of fire and light. Nixera charged forward, her markings blazing brighter than ever before. She was no longer her father's pawn. She was no longer a traitor. She was a warrior, and this was her fight. The daughters stand. The throne room burned. Columns of smoke twisted like serpents through the air, illuminated by the flickering blue glow of sparking power conduits. The walls, once pristine and imposing, bore the scorched scars of battle. In the center of the chaos, Nixera stood tall, her glowing markings pulsing with fury, her human rifle clutched in trembling hands. Across from her, the Emperor of the Xerixian Empire, her father, rose to his full height, his black armor cracked but unbroken, his golden eyes burning with cold, unrelenting hatred. The air around him shimmered with residual energy from his personal shield, a weapon as impenetrable as his will. "You have lost, Nyxura," the Emperor growled, his voice like distant thunder. "Look around you. You defy your bloodline for these insects. And for what? A futile rebellion." Nyxura's chest heaved as she struggled to steady her breathing. Her muscles ached, her every nerve alight with exhaustion, but she held his gaze. Behind her, Captain Grant and his strike team remained pinned against the walls, their weapons depleted, their armor cracked. Yet they were alive. Because of her. "They are not insects," Nyxura spat, her voice echoing through the smoke. "They are stronger than you'll ever understand." The Emperor's lips curled into a sneer, his towering form advancing toward her. "Strength. Do you call their desperation strength? Their defiance is meaningless. I will crush them, as I have crushed every world before." "You think strength is destruction," Nyxura shot back, her glowing markings flaring brighter with every word. "You believe power is control, but you're wrong. Real strength is choosing to protect, to stand when the odds are against you." The Emperor's eyes narrowed, his fury barely contained. "You dare lecture me? You, who betrayed your blood?" Nyxura raised her rifle, the soft hum of its depleted power cell filling the silence. The weapon was useless now, little more than a symbol, but she refused to lower it. "I betrayed no one," she said, her voice steady. "I chose what was right. And you're afraid of that." The Emperor's laugh reverberated through the ruined chamber, deep and mocking. "Afraid? Of a child and her pets." "Not of me," Nyxura replied, stepping closer. "Of them." The Emperor froze, just for a moment, as she pointed toward the humans. Grant, battered and bloodied, pushed himself upright, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "She's right," Grant said, locking eyes with the Emperor. "We're still here. We're still fighting. And we won't stop." The humans behind him, though injured and spent, echoed his words with quiet resolve. It was more than defiance. It was a promise. "You can destroy our cities," Grant continued. "You can take our lives. But you'll never take our will to fight. That's something you'll never understand." The Emperor turned back to Nyxura, his expression darkening further. "You are weak, just like them." Nyxura's markings blazed brighter than ever, bathing the room in a radiant light. For the first time, she felt no fear of him. "I'm stronger than you'll ever be," she said softly, "because I choose to stand with them." The Emperor let out a roar, raising his arm to unleash a final devastating energy blast. The room seemed to warp, heat waves distorting the air as the power in his armor flared to life. "Nyxura," Grant shouted, his voice lost to the rising hum of energy. But Nyxura didn't move. She stood tall, her glowing markings pulsing in perfect harmony, her gaze locked on her father's. Then, with a final surge of courage, she raised her hands and let her markings flare. For the first time in her life, she didn't suppress them. She didn't hide the bioluminescent energy that coursed through her veins, a trait the Empire had always prized but taught her to control. She let it flow. The light erupted from her in brilliant waves, colliding with the Emperor's blast. The room exploded in blinding energy as her power met his, crashing like tidal waves against each other. Nyxura gritted her teeth, pain searing through her as the sheer force of the clash tore at her very being. But she didn't falter. Her father's voice, his authority, his judgment, all of it, began to crack beneath her will. "You cannot win," the Emperor bellowed. "No," Nyxura said, her voice rising like a clarion call. "But neither can you." With a final scream, her energy shattered his blast and slammed into the Emperor, knocking him back. His armor cracked, the mighty warlord thrown to his knees, his first moment of weakness in decades. The throne room fell silent. Smoke drifted lazily through the air as Nyxura dropped to her knees, her energy spent, her markings dimming to a faint glow. For a long moment, No one moved. Then Grant's voice rang out. "Niksara, are you?" "I'm fine," she whispered, though every fiber of her body ached. She forced herself to look up. Her father knelt in the ruins of his throne, his head bowed. The man who had ruled with an iron fist, who had commanded fleets and brought star systems to their knees, now looked smaller, diminished. "You have lost, Father," she said softly. "Not just this battle, but me. You can no longer control me. And these humans, they will never bow to you." Captain Grant approached, his weapon still at the ready, but his gaze lingered on Niksara, his ally, their savior. "It's over," he said, his voice carrying through the ruined chamber. The Emperor didn't respond. For the first time in her life, Niksara saw him as he truly was, not a god, not a legend, but a man, a broken man. And for the first time, Niksara felt free, the dawn of something new. Hours later, as the Harbinger lay crippled in the desert sands, Earth's forces regrouped. The Exarixian ships retreated, their morale shattered by the defeat of their leader. Niksara stood beside Grant on the base's observation deck, watching the sun rise over the dunes. The light painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, a stark contrast to the destruction the desert had witnessed. "It's beautiful," she said quietly. Grant nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "It always is, after the storm." Niksara turned to him, her golden eyes reflecting the morning light. "You humans, you fight like no other species I've known." "We don't know how to quit," Grant replied with a grin. Niksara's markings glowed softly, not with pain or shame, but with something new, hope. She looked out at the horizon, where a new dawn broke, and for the first time in her life, she felt she belonged. "Then I will fight with you," she said. Grant looked at her, his smile widening. "Welcome to the fight, Princess." Together, they watched as the sun climbed higher into the sky, its light spreading across a world that had refused to fall. For humanity, for Earth, and for the warrior who had chosen to stand with them, the real battle was only beginning.